What would you do if your co-founder backed out on the day you resigned?
Oh my God.
On this episode of the Startup Leap, we speak with Carmelle Cadet, founder of EmTech, who's helping central banks modernize for a digital future. From growing up in Haiti to leading blockchain financial services at IBM, Carmelle took the bold leap to building EmTech. She secured her first customer, a $500,000 contract, using only mock-ups of the product, and also landed central banks in her first year. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Her almost co-founder backed out on the day she resigned. Yet, she's raised over $12 million and is redefining central banking.
Well, I was supposed to have a co-founder who backed out at the last minute after I resigned.
Oh God.
This is a story of grit, resilience, and bold ambition. One you don't want to miss. So, what are you waiting for? Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw, and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap, and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Yvonne.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at Local Globe and OpenSeed VC, respectively. Local Globe and OpenSeed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode on the Startup Leap. Today we have the incredible Carmelle Cadet with us. Today, Carmelle is the founder and CEO of EmTech, and her journey is just incredible. From growing up at Haiti and then moving over to the US and being at IBM for over 10 years, leading its blockchain and financial services division, which we'll go deep into in a little bit later in the episode. Carmelle's story is just incredible, and I am also even looking forward to this conversation. But thank you so much for making time for us, Carmelle. It's really lovely to have you.
Thank you for joining us, Carmelle.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I remember when the podcast was first launching, so I've been looking forward to it.
We have been looking forward to it as well. Thank you for taking the time. I guess maybe to start off, who is Carmelle? If someone were to ask your friends or your family, how would they describe you? And tell us a little bit about your childhood. Did you always have the entrepreneurial streak in you? Did you do anything that kind of gave those early signs that you might build something someday?
Well, I definitely come from a family of entrepreneurs, but to this day, my mom still wonders how crazy am I to launch a company that nobody really understands kind of what we do, and we're global, we're international, so I travel a lot. So my mom quite wonders still. But just to dive into my background and how I ended up at starting EmTech, I'm originally from Haiti, like you said, and I think it's important to kind of understand that context because that really is at the core of what continues to motivate me and EmTech. So I was born and raised in Haiti, and the idea of financial access and financial product became very clear to me that how much was lacking in Haiti when I moved to the US. I became fascinated by financial services when I moved to the US. One of the first recommendation that my mom's friend gave her when we moved, I was still a minor then, is take every credit card they give you because this is how you build credit in the US and you need credit to survive. Looking back now, it was really, really good advice. But what I always remember this because it was such a change on moving to the US and learning how to navigate financial services, the banking system, of course, getting work as an immigrant, getting and opening a bank account became part of our lives and what we had to learn and navigate into the US. So I always wondered back then, it's like, how come this wasn't available when we were in Haiti? And I was 16 at the time and just navigating, going to high school, figuring out college, realizing how expensive that was. and then learning about student loan programs or grants, and just learning the financial services industry and in my own little world, as far as what mattered to me at the time. So some of the things were not available to me, partly because I didn't have a green card yet, or I wasn't a citizen yet. So you start seeing the limitations and how important it would have been for me to have access to capital, whether it's to buy a car to go to school, whether it's to pay for school. It took me longer to do school because I had to pay out of pocket. We did not qualify for student loans. So just my experience with financial services always made me curious on how difficult and how important it was in our lives. But when I started, and my very first job was actually in sales. I used to do magazine telemarketing, kind of calling and selling magazine subscriptions by then. That was my very, very first job in the US. I didn't always connect the dots, but that's probably where I learned how to sell at a very, very early day. And then I ended up finding applying for a teller job. I moved around. I moved to Virginia to stay with an aunt, and I got my first job at a bank as a drive-through teller. So that's when I really got into the financial service system and seeing kind of day to day again, how people navigate their paychecks. They were always happy, coming to the drive-through, and you give them cash, they cash their check, and seeing how people navigate their lives with financial services, and then selling and say, do you want a credit card? Do you want a loan? Do you need access to other products? So I learned from the very early tranches, and then grew from there. I ended up at IBM Credit Union, came back to Florida, again as a teller, and then made my way up. I never ended up in customer service for whatever reason, kind of opening new accounts and stuff. But I did a lot of teller work, and then ended up in mortgages, doing lending. So went into the back end of banking and
Interesting.
how to assess risk, how to look at borrowers, and how to provide loans. That's really how I ended up having an opportunity to learn just the basics of finance, and I continue to be fascinated by it.
I think that's a nice segue into EmTech. Tell us exactly what EmTech does.
Sure. So I decided to launch EmTech, really part of the story of saying, how can we build better financial markets in other countries? So fast forward from the time I was as a teller to IBM, I spent 10 years at IBM. That's when my career, my passion for financial services met my interest into technology. So coming into IBM, my background is in corporate finance. I got very lucky. To get an IBM. I got an internship out of nowhere. I decided to apply for it. It was the first year that they were assigning applicants to a corporate finance function. So I got to learn the business of tech, right? Kind of how do you make money? How do you manage resources? How do you drive profitability? Just a profit and loss management of a tech company. I got to see that. So I built my career around that and really became passionate about big, complicated tech. IBM is global. No one really picks up an IBM product off the shelf, but we use IBM all the time in a lot of the very complicated day-to-day operations. And that's when, in 2017, IBM asked me to help launch the IBM blockchain division. That was my first light bulb moment, where my passion into financial services and in my understanding of blockchain really was a match on how can you solve this problem in a way that scales better and that can give people more access to financial services, regardless of where they come from, regardless of where they live, and regardless of how much money they make. Because one thing I learned through the banking system is that banking is really for people who have money to keep money in the bank. So the banks can loan and make money, and that's really the business model. It's very simple, but it doesn't cater to everyone. And that's when I got the opportunity to work with a team that was pioneering for the first time how to use blockchain to tokenize cash. So the paper cash that you use every day, And then Bitcoin was coming out using blockchain technology, really showing a different way that money can move, money can be created. And I became really passionate, and to my core, I believe that how financial markets can evolve can really drive financial inclusion and financial resilience by design. And that's when I decided to launch EmTech. I realized that there was such a timely and maybe once in a lifetime opportunity, if you think about it, of going to talk to whoever is printing paper cash to let them know that there's a new technology on how they can do that more efficiently that can drive better results. So I saw it, I could not unsee it. We ended up winning the opportunity that we went after in IBM, which was to help the Central Bank of Bahamas to use a new technology to improve the financial market there, and how to drive financial inclusion in their country. And I became super passionate about that, decided to leave IBM and launch EmTech to go talk to central banks to let them know how blockchain technology would be a game changer for financial markets.
I
I
love
mean, I
that.
feel like there's so much in there. Is it like actually the type of problem you've tackled? Central banks are a very unique customer base. This is a massive impact and potential problem. You solve a problem for that type of customer, you're literally making lives of millions of people instantly better. So the scale of the problem is definitely massive. You say it very easily. That's when you launched EmTech. I want to get into the nitty-gritty of that. What was that process like? It sounds like it felt natural because of your work at IBM, but you had been at IBM 10 years. There was almost a decade. There was some security that gave you. There was some comfort that gave you. I'm sure there were still other opportunities for you to grow within IBM. How did you decide to chase this opportunity that seemed, I would even say, because I think you launched in 2019. In retrospect, seems like it was crazy. Like in 2019, trying to go for blockchain, for emerging markets, for central banks, it must have been this complex thing that very few people would have gotten. So how did you build the conviction that it was something big enough, impactful enough, aligned enough to who you were to take such a leap?
Yeah, and just to add to that, after 10 years at IBM, what was it that came first? Sounds like you already had really great relationships with some of these central banks, as you mentioned. Was it the product or was it the customers?
So where do I start? So one, for sure, being seeing a problem that I always wanted to solve and then know how, and then combine that with just a twinkling of hope and enough confidence to say, I think I can solve this. I don't know much about everything else in the world, but I think this one, I think I have an idea on how to do it. I convinced myself that I could. Not that a lot of signs were pointing that way, because I actually tried to keep my job at IBM and made the pitch internally to IBM, but it wasn't the priority, and a lot of people did not understand the what I saw anyway. So the choice was whether, do I go and put that aside on the side of my mind and then come back to it later, or if that was the right time. This is where the second part of what made me make the leap comes in. There's a bit of spiritual and personal moment that you really have to go through to do this, because it's not an easy decision by any means. I know sometimes the headline make it seem really cool. The fundraising, especially around 2019, everybody was raising a big round. Everyone was raising money like it was falling out of trees. So it was very alluring. But I did actually have a 2-year-old at the time. My son was 2. And my husband is also an entrepreneur, so he owns his own company in very different field. So I was the kind of steady paycheck, if you will, out of the household. I was the one with the 401k, and yes, the office down in New York City could have been very, very much easy to stay. But there was a problem to solve. And I want to double click on that, because when I talk to founders and fellow founders or people who are thinking about it, I tell people that's the one thing that still to this day, 5 years later, helps me get up in the morning. Is the problem that I set out to solve is still a problem? And I got so much validation along the way. Even though we pivoted, we had to find, our business model. We had to figure out the narrative. What is the positioning? What are the pain points? Aside from you having a dream and a problem that you want to solve for, going to talk and finding out who's the customer, what is the product model, what is the product, what is the business model, what is the product market fit. The way I started talking to central banks about using blockchain to tokenize cash, but quickly realized that that was going to be a long-term strategy for them. The decision was, how do you become relevant today and on that journey? Right, kind of starting with something that's maybe 5 years down the line, and then being able to create value. That's how we ended up finding out that there was much more to do than just digitizing cash for the central banks. So the way I talk about it today, 5 years after, is that we realized that central banks were another enterprise client. They're different in what they do, but their need for technology and their need for tools is just like a commercial bank that need to modernize what they do. When, whether it's cloud computing, whether it's online banking, whether it's a mobile banking app, you've seen the evolution in financial services over the past years. So central banks themselves, they have a different mandate. They're supposed to regulate that financial market, and they also are the only entity that can legally print cash. So very, very unique combination of what they do that no other organization does. So when we hone in on that, we realized that there was a level of infrastructure, right? And the financial market tower, if you would, or pyramid, that very bottom infrastructure was very, very old and manual. And central banks could not get to do and deliver and modernize their financial market without actually fixing that. So that's the layer that in which we saw the most impact that we could have in modernizing financial markets to deliver on the dream and the vision that I have, which is to make financial markets inclusive around the world. But I tell people, talking about financial inclusion without thinking about how sound the financial market is, for me, does not get me excited, right? If you're going to help people get into the financial market, you have to make sure that when they get there, that it is something sound, it is something that's going to help them grow, it is something that's going to be part of positive experience in their lives. And that's what EmTech set out to do. We're just doing it in a very, very different way, for sure.
Fantastic. One of the things that's coming through from what you're saying is that you did have like an initial thesis to the market, but very quickly found out that you needed to build some rails before you could pretty much make that happen. So you were flexible, you pivoted, you were like, we're going to solve an immediate problem that demonstrates our initial value, and then we will try to achieve that goal in the long term. I think this is important because we've had a few founders say this, but I think it's worth belaboring the point that you can be very strong-minded in your initial belief of what you think the problem is, but putting it in front of the customer and listening to what they're saying. Because I imagine you wouldn't get this far if you weren't flexible enough to be like, okay, we came with this proposition. You don't need this just quite yet. You probably do, but it's probably like, yeah, exactly. Bye. As opposed to let's work with you and then get that done. That's super helpful. Yvonne, you wanted to ask the question. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's actually one of the best decisions. That if I could take credit for anything, that's I can look back now. That's probably one of the best decisions I've made so far.
now, one thing I'm really curious about is working with central banks is no easy feat. We already know that working with like your traditional banks, incumbent banks is hard, and sales cycles can be very long. Talk to us about the sales cycles for central banks and some of the things you had to take into consideration.
Sure. So there are two components to it. Absolutely, the type of institution. You're not, regardless of how cool your technology is or how much value you're bringing or solution that you're bringing to their problems. There's a procurement process, there's the approval process, there's the bureaucracy and so on. That's almost by design. But almost kind of archaic that people are trying to modernize now a bit. But the sales cycle is pretty long. One, we're innovating with them. They're not particularly, most central banks don't have big high tech, mission as part of their views. But when you realize what their mandate actually is, how do you tie that to technology and how technology can help them be better central banks? But we talk about this at a high level on the role that central banks play in financial markets. We fundamentally believe that it is important. Fundamentally, I think that's a differentiating factor for us, because most people that you would talk to either hate central banks, don't like them, don't understand what they do, and the moment you start talking about that, it's like, oh, including investors. So we can get into fundraising for that too. It's like, how did we become a VC backed into this space? But the idea is, we understood that we were breaking into a new category of the financial market, so digitization, if you will. We've built in a very agile way. The first central bank that we pitched was on a Figma prototype, right? Figma prototype. So it was really about pioneering a concept that they've never seen before and that addressed the problem that they had. That's been our secret and our effective way of working with central banks. When we walk in, we're not asking for a license for a new fintech product that we're launching. We're coming in almost as their Microsoft, a modern Microsoft or a modern IBM, that is solely focused on their pain points. And they love that. They've never had that before. And that's something that we take to heart, because it's very aligned with our mission. We see them as critical financial institutions that will enable what we see as the future, which is a better set of financial markets for people to get access to. But lastly, it's about delivering value. When you think about it, they are a different type of customer, but from a business perspective, it doesn't change. Can you create value? Can you understand their pain points? Can you actually care, genuinely care? And can you build value for them? And that's what has worked for us so far.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
Something I wanted to double click on is you went from IBM, having spent a decade there,
Yeah.
to being in the household, having a household of entrepreneurs, having a toddler as well, being based in New York, but focusing on the African market, Caribbean market, and also being a new category, right? As you just said. How was that initial fundraising journey for you? And what point did you decide to raise that initial institutional capital? And what did that look like?
Sure. So we had quite a bit of a different start, I would say, because when I left IBM, one opportunity that we were able to capture right away is becoming one of the vendors on the first central bank digital currency that was launched in Bahamas. So we actually got our first contract there and seeded ourselves through COVID for about a year and a half, because
That's
we started in
incredible.
July 2019 and COVID hit March 2020. By the time I was hiring any one person, it was it was a distributed team by nature, right? But we were able to deliver in the middle of COVID and actually get paid from the central bank. So maybe, yes, coming from IBM, I knew how to put a contract together. I knew the difference between services and software. I was able to negotiate, kind of a $500,000 contract for us to say, okay, here's what we can do. We know how to hire. We know how to deliver. So it kind of gave me at least to hit the ground running. And then while we were doing that, I spent a lot of time talking to central banks. I did my exit interview in Kenya, in Nairobi. I was already on the road by the
While
time
pitching customers, you're like,
pitching
okay,
customers
who's
already,
first? Yeah.
embedding myself, and that was very much so, kind of embedding myself into the ecosystem, and I loved it. I never looked back. So that's really kind of my go to market, my market development strategy, on really being on the ground and being able to share what we're thinking and getting feedback. I get a ton of feedback on when I moderate panels, when I ended up emceeing a first event, SoloFounder at the time. It was November 2019. And that got me 3 introductions to 3 different central banks, which led us to signing up 6 central banks a year later. And I was just speaking. So people, thought leadership, people see what you're bringing to the table and have the network to do introductions. That has worked well, very, very much for us. So by the time I was fundraising, we've had made some level of progress and show some proof points. One, we could deliver on services for a central bank. We could sign contract. Second, we were pioneering a new product that there was very little competition in the market, and we already had a central bank who signed an MOU. So that's when 2020 was really hard, and George Floyd and everything else. I happened to come across Clayton Bryant tweet from 500 Startup, who said, here's my Calendly. This is a hard time right now for founders. If you want somebody to talk to, just, book some time. And I happened to come across that tweet, and I happened to book time with him, then pitch him at all. Then, no commitment. And I didn't think they were going to invest. And I got a call two months later from 500 and said, we'd like to welcome you to the cohort. And they were the first accelerator, the only accelerator that we've ever
Wow.
through. But that was the first institutional check or a VC check that we got for 150,000. But again, it introduced us to a bunch of investors. We went to demo day, and we ended up closing about 3 million of pre-seed at that time.
Wow. Look, there are two things that are kind of coming through the story. I think the best is the best first investor, aside from you, are your customers. It sounds like you got customers, $500,000 in contract, already gave you that liquidity. So you didn't even need to spend time like really looking at the fundraising piece. You were just trying to deliver on this product. It also de-risked the business in my mind, because very quickly, if you had gone in my mind with like maybe just a blank piece of paper, I would have been, this is too new a product
Yeah.
in two newer markets. Like central banks are hard to sell to. All the bells and whistles would have come in the heuristics. But you're like, look, we've gotten the customers. They're paying for the product. We're building the product. That has de-risked the things in the early stage. And I think the second
But
thing is, yeah.
But Maria, at the time, I did not have the vocabulary at all. This is 5 years later, vocabulary. Back
Benefit
then,
of
it was like, what is an accelerator?
Are you serious? So it was like, but I think that this is a great
What is
place
a
to
kiss?
be. No, but it's a great place to be. I definitely think that in a parallel universe where you probably took a different path, at that time, I think if then during COVID you were still in the early stages of trying to buy, it would have been a completely different fundraising conversation, I think. And I think that that would have been, and maybe for some founders, this is the way to think about things.
Yeah.
That especially if you're trying to really break into a market, or you're creating a new market, or you're doing something that's particularly hard to compare with other things, the bar for traction is probably how you want to de-risk and like just show people that, look, it's not just an idea. Customers can actually buy this thing. We can actually build this thing, and here's what that looks like. The other thing is like the thing with 500 startups, I think more and more a recurring theme is that people just go for stuff, and you never know what like happens.
And in this case, you didn't even go for it.
You just like booked a Calendly link.
And
I love that.
if it wasn't COVID, I probably would not have been able to do it, because they
Yeah,
usually have
true.
a 3 months you have to move to San Francisco. This was the only year I think they did a virtual
Okay,
cohort.
yeah.
So you talk about the luck, the time, and yes, I really believe, I know people say that there's a bit of luck in everything that happens. I'm a true believer of that. You just have to be prepared. You just have to, be ready to take the opportunity, and hopefully, make it, make lemonade with lemons when you're given some. That's really the idea. But you're right. The investor journey for me is, I feel bittersweet about it in a way, because I cannot take it out of my system of how hard it's been.
Yeah.
But at the same time, saying that we raised $12 million already is, I know it's a lot. I know it's a success KPI. I'm proud of it. I'm humble. I know how lucky I am to have been able to raise that. But it's been really, really hard. One, yes, very different market. Most investors don't know how to underwrite the deal, if you will, because a lot of the sales cycle, and they see central banks as governments, and they kind of think it's all lumped on, but it's separate. And then what do central banks do? Oh,
Hmm.
Africa, what, why Africa, how, and I get questions like, how much money are you going to have to pay under the table for this? I have,
Oh,
yes,
Hannah.
Oh
I
my
have
gosh.
not had to at all. And I want to say that on the records, because that's another thing that I think some markets get a bad rep. I know
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
happen, but that's just not my experience. That's just not my experience. We've have great partners in Nigeria. Bank of Ghana has been such an amazing partner for us as a client. Being able to build and start from scratch and having a design partner, a central bank as a design partner for you, is not easy. Is not easy. And we were zooming it out, workshop every week. We were taking requirements, sprint, delivering, getting feedback, and keep going. And we zoomed it out for about 12 months until we were able to take them live. And that opened up, and there are some major KPIs that we're going to share in 2025 of how much the product that we delivered, how much it is catalyzing certain innovation in Africa. So for me, that's the first KPI as far as increasing and expanding financial access for people safely. But the second KPIs that we're seeing now as we grow into that space is how you can literally help countries lower their risk as a country. Very, very detailed, nuanced insight that you get to see is, by enabling central banks, there's so much of an impact, of wider impact that you can have in the economy. And I'm really happy that we start tapping into that next year.
I love that, and I love the impact that you're having on these entire nations. It's incredible. One thing that I wanted to just delve into was around the team. So you mentioned obviously you started in 2019
Yes.
and you had a distributed team. You obviously came with a wealth of experience from IBM. How did you think about that initial team?
Well, I was supposed to have a co-founder
Hmm.
who backed out at the last minute after I resigned.
Oh gosh.
No.
And at the time,
Yes,
I'm sure that that must have left a lot of like raised a lot of questions in your mind that
of
you were
course.
making this leap, and then the person that you set out to do it with is suddenly no longer doing it with you.
That's
After
right.
you
That's right.
resigned, that is
Crazy.
not great time. What?
After I resigned, the wife won. I don't blame him. Blame him, but the wife won. In the sense of, it wasn't his first startup. He
Right.
was at IBM for many years, and but the team was disbanding. We talked about kind of going together into this particular market that we both saw the opportunities to, but he had two kids instead of me having one, and it's a choice that I totally respected, and we're still
Yeah.
friends, and we're still now coming back and collaborating for other opportunities actually. So it's all good. And my head of product, which I also at IBM, that I was also hoping to recruit, now is a founder of a successful startup as well. So people have evolved, and people do what they think is best for them, and that's what I did too. I happened to hire my first interim CTO to help me come deliver the deal in the Bahamas. And we did that. Wasn't a good fit for the long term, if you will. They had very specialized knowledge. But yes, it was out of Bulgaria for the first time. That was kind of where we hired, cost effective, very good quality and knowledge base. But as we grew, we needed a team that was more embedded into the typical development process, software development process. So because although I started with blockchain, the
Mm.
first product that we actually sold is not a blockchain product. Instead, it was very much innovative in the sense that it was API led. Since you hear Flutter Wave, you hear a lot of the fintechs. By the way, I think open banking and APIs is like Africa's second wave of mobile money. Because the rest
Yeah.
of the world doesn't use APIs the way the Flutterwave, the Paystack, and everybody else has done that. So we saw that, right, as I was going to events, presentation from fintechs and so on, financial services being delivered and opened up via APIs. We realized that there was an opportunity to also bring that modern stack to it. And Bank of Ghana is the first central bank to have API led reporting. to them. So real-time data, being able to capture and bring insight is the fundamental reason why they feel comfortable letting companies go out to market, because now they can get data much faster. Very much a kind of light bulb moment, working through the client and then figuring that out kind of in the midst and between meetings. It's like, aha, that's the part that kind of changes the mindset, the framework, and the approach. But since then, we hired people. When we started, we hired people out of India. So I stepped into the solo founder role and kind of rolled up my sleeves. So I was chief product officer, I was chief financial officer, I was chief therapist officer, I was, you name it. And we've had early turnovers, and people who were here at the beginning are not a good fit kind of long term, if you will. But now really happy that we've actually built teams across Africa. And we have engineering team in India as well. But I have people with me here in the US. And as we grow, very much have a model of growing where our customers are. And for us to be able to support them. We like the idea of being their partners for the long term, their innovation partners, their tech partners, and how they continue to focus and do what's right for their economy and for their financial markets.
Incredible. Now, there's two things I want to double click on there. First of all, you mentioned that you had an interim CTO. Now, there's often this debate around outsourcing technology, particularly in the early days, or having an in-house team, right? How did you navigate that? What do you think made it work for you at that particular time? And then on the other side of that, just around the culture, because you've now got this team that is distributed globally, different time zones and so on. How have you navigated the culture? Because oftentimes it's an afterthought that people think about at the point in which it becomes dysfunctional. So how have you kind of managed that as the company's grown and scaled as well?
Definitely a lot of lessons. I don't spend enough time kind of going back and thinking about it, but there were quite a bit of lessons because I fired my first CTO as we were fundraising for the pre-seed round.
Wow.
No.
Yes.
As you're fundraising as well.
As we were fundraising.
Gosh.
And of course, when you get into an accelerator, you get to see kind of typical what companies have. First of all, you're a solo founder. Where's your co-founder? Second, where's your CTO? And your CTO should have, should almost be a co-founder. So I was quite a bit of a different animal in the whole pack, if you will, at that time. But it was the right thing to do.
That must have been a hard thing to do, actually.
It was tough. It was tough. It was dramatic. It was tough and dramatic because it was a competitor who actually poached him. And the way I found out that this was all going to crumble down. Okay, so we have time, so I can share this. The first offer the first term sheet I've ever gotten was for a SPAC.
Wow. This was at the height of the SPAC market,
yes,
right?
Yes. So 2020, end of 2020, we got an offer to buy the whole company. We got a term sheet. We were raising $2 million at the time. We got the whole $2 million, but with a condition to go public within 12 months.
Whoa.
Just looking back on that market, it's insane.
It was insane. And this was the first time, and you remember I told you, it's like fundraising was totally new to me. So of course, this is the first time I hear of SPAC. Of course, everyone wants a term sheet. I got a term sheet, right? It's like,
and now you have to go public.
And it was a fascinating offer because the investor at the time came from a network that I trusted, was really excited about what we were doing, but had a different view on it, wanted to do something different. But of course, the money was just, okay, you can have the whole $2 million that you want. And I started making some calls. Of course, I called 500, our investor at the time. I called the largest investors at the time and say, what do you guys think? And they said, absolutely not. This is not going to happen. and I kind of de-escalated from there. But my CTO at the time was not happy, right? Because there was a conversation around equity and having a term sheet,
Liquidity.
of course,
Yeah.
liquidity event happening. And
Yeah.
says, this is the best deal that we're going to get. I can't believe you're walking away from this. That was another big decision, right? Kind of how do you walk away from someone handing you a $2 million check and you don't even have a contract yet, kind of a tech contract yet. So that was the beginning. And as I was going through that, I was finalizing, terms. We got attorneys. Of course, 500 asked us to get lawyers. You have to get a C corp, created. So we're going through the process of formalizing our company so we can fundraise. And that became kind of a sore subject at that point. And one of the forms that our law firm gave us to have all the employees sign was a non-compete. And he refused to sign a non-compete.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
you're
that was,
like, why?
what's going on? And, as luck would have it, again, when you have a network, when you talk to people, people understand where you're coming from. I had someone totally randomly text me and say, I think your CTO is working with a competitor. I'm on a group chat right now.
As in, whilst he was still working with you?
While he was still working, yes. So he was taking calls and someone, yes, I have stories.
Oh my God.
And had to nip that in the butt. Had to nip that in the butt because it was a big risk at the time. And the competitor, by the way, has failed and closed shop, and it was a founder of another company and got kicked out of the company by
Oh
VCs.
no. But you
It was
know what I feel about
problematic.
things? I feel things like this is better earlier than later. Like it's better
Yeah.
because I can imagine if you have that like throughout the business, the weight it would have caused. But I want to try to get some lessons in retrospect. What do you think? Were there early signs that you could have picked? Because this point on aligned vision is where most co-founders break up. It's like we just fundamentally disagree on
Mhm.
something that's critical to the vision of the company. So were there signs? What would you say if you could tell yourself, as you were exploring that person for the role, what would you do differently, essentially?
Um, Especially in the early stage, if someone is more focused on liquidity event and shares and funding than the mission, it's probably not a good match. That was my lesson out of that. If I had one red flag, it was they were in for the money at the time. We had a contract. I had a contract by the time I hired them, right? So it was kind of a sign like, okay, this is the company that's going to break into this. And then, along the way, when you start kind of sharing your vision, when you're developing, how you want to, what kind of company that you want to build, right? Especially as a founder, that falls on you. If the person really can't, if you're not feeling that match, it's probably not going to be better when it's time to actually decide, okay, this is what we're going to do, and the money is not going to come anytime soon. We're just gonna have to trust each other that we can actually build to get into that money. The money doesn't kind of come out. And along the way, I've had people join us. They're no longer with us, obviously, but sometimes you can tell by the advice they give you, right?
Mm.
You can tell by the advice they give you. Sometimes if it's some people don't know, that's fine, but if it's consistently kind of mismatched to who you are, how you want to build your company, how you want to be seen, it might be great for something else but not for this.
Mm, fantastic.
How
Wow.
has that impacted the way in which you hire since that event, essentially?
I hire a lot on mission. I hire a
Mm.
lot, and everybody in the company is underpaid.
Mm,
Everyone in this company is underpaid. We've been a very lean company. Our spending has been consistent for the past 4 years, pretty much flat for the past 4 years. Um, the of course, everyone now has an equity component of their part owners of the company. So I lean very much on that, because if I learn anything in the 5 years is that I will bet on us and our vision and the role that we play in the ecosystem any day of the week. However, in order to get it done, you have to have people who understand that,
Mm.
right? who understand that we have to build, we have to deliver, and that we have a big, big, big mission to deliver on. And our success means anything, it means much more than what we can count today. So I talked to the team about, I fundraise. I don't expose the team to the emotional roller coaster of fundraising. Just focus. Thank you for trusting me. But my first job is to make sure that we all have a job and this company stays. My number one rule is don't die, right? So I put that first and I go hard and get the capital that we need for us to continue to build. But I need you to understand, I need you to be on board with me on the mission that we're going on. And I need you to be committed to actually going along the ride. And if that's the case, then there's a lot more on the other side of that. That's kind of my first starting line. Everything else is HR, fit, skills, and that kind of stuff. But that's very, very much important. And I see it today because we're basically a 24/7 company.
How large is the team?
We are 45 now. Not everybody is full-time. Not everybody's full-time employee. We have
Yeah.
quite about more than half of that are contractors. But we are a 40 body team. And we're pretty flat. We have some section, of course, you have product, you have sales, you have engineering, you have delivery and stuff like this, but everyone works together. Everything is very much interlinked and interdependent right now. Whether we sold a customer today, in order for him to renew tomorrow, the delivery has to be on there, the customer success has to be
Yeah.
there. That relationship needs to continue to be there. When I go, I'm not trying to sell all the time. Is being able to stop by and say hi, text, have a great day. All of that comes in and that continues to build relationship with your customer.
One thing I wanted to double click on is just your philosophy on equity. You mentioned that, people are probably paid below market, right? Which is as is the case with many startups. How have you incentivized your stars? How do you think about distribution of equity? Just because it's something that can backfire, and oftentimes it's not something that's very black and white, right?
I had to learn. I've had my attorney say, don't promise X number of shares because you don't know what the cap table is going to be like. Oops, you know. And then you have people that come and they're no longer part of the team, but they still have equity. So that's also part of that. It started, of course, with me having the wrong understanding of equity, right? I can still hear my mom saying, you have to have 51% of your company. Otherwise, you're going to lose control of your company. Don't ever sell more than 51%. The truth is that's not really how it works, right? So when you look at most founders and, the Jack Dorseys, everyone, that has made it up the ladder here, have closer to about 25% of the company by the time it's all said and done. But the difference between ownership and control, those are very two different things. So understanding the difference is rule number one. But when it comes to compensation, I try not to, I lean on it to motivate. And I try to explain to the team the percentage of what the number of shares compared to the total number of shares or what it is today is not what to look at. That's going to continue. If we're doing our job right, your percentage of ownership should continue to decrease a bit, right? Even if I give you more shares, that's the way to know that we're growing in value. And the price per share at the end of the day is what we're driving towards, not the percentage of ownership. Because once you realize that, it's a very different calculation that it takes sometimes, it's counterintuitive because you want to say, I own 20% of the company. 20%
Yeah,
of zero is zero, right?
exactly.
But 1% of 10 billion is a lot.
Yeah.
So how do I usually walk through that math with every employee when we talk about equity, what is the number of shares they get? I usually go through and say, this is kind of a snapshot at this particular time. This is where the company is. this is how much the last round of the price was. And then I walked them through the difference between a price per share for employees based on 409A valuation versus the market share, to really kind of make it clear the incentive that's there on how much they pay to get in something that can be $100 or a
In the
thousand dollars.
future.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've seen this done in many ways. I mean, there's an entrepreneur that I previously worked with that basically created a simulation of what your equity could look like. But obviously, you need to have guardrails around that,
Disclaimers and
right?
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's really valuable that you actually go and explain this
And
to your
educate.
employees,
Yeah.
because a lot of people, like I have a lot of operators that reach out saying, can you explain to me what this option pool means, and just like the very basics. I think it's super valuable in terms of like really incentivizing people to understand
Yes.
what exactly are you getting.
Are you signing up for? And also
Yeah,
the risk involved as well, because I also
Yeah.
really I think that it's very interesting that you take the pains to educate, but because many companies don't.
yeah,
And I remember even whilst we were a branch, because at the time there was actually a secondary event, like a liquidity event where people sold their holdings. But before then, we had done a training to teaching them like, now imagine like these are employees who are based out of like Africa, India, like just giving them the information to make the decision, because again, the options were optional.
Yeah.
Like you could choose to exercise them or not. I know we're rounding up. I wanted to touch very quickly on being a solo founder. I'm a solo GP. It's one of the loneliest journeys ever. And
Yeah.
it is, and I feel like as founders, I feel like it's even worse, because I think for investors, you have this diversification element, but for founders, this is your thing. Like, this is the only thing that
This
you're
is it.
thinking about. This is it. So tell me, how do you manage that? How do you surround yourself with people to brainstorm with when it gets really low? Because the highs can be high and the lows can be low. How do you navigate that as a founder, as a solo founder?
So this is where I tell people, you hear a lot of people say, before you jump into entrepreneurship, people say have a backup plan and make sure you can, you do this when maybe you have a career somewhere kind of lining up for you. I don't think that's particularly helpful. I think more importantly is having a good support system.
mm,
It is way more sustainable. It is way more aligned with if you have a vision, because it's going to take time for it to happen. What you need is time. It's not a backup plan. What you need is actually time. Um, because one thing I didn't mention, when I left IBM, I convinced my husband to let me take all of our eventually it became all. At the time I asked for anything I could take or borrow. Eventually it was like the whole thing kind of had to give, right? Because some days we had to make payroll and I didn't get paid, but I had to pay my team so we could deliver and get paid from the client, right? Kind of having that cash flow. Sometimes my husband landed the payroll from his company. So a backup plan does not do that, right? A backup plan is giving up and kind of going back to something. I think a support system is much better. Not only that, but you have to be able to embrace learning. You don't have to know everything. I learned so much. Sometimes I'm on calls with investor and I'm Googling what company they're talking about, right? And I'm Googling what term they're referencing right now. I did not have the vocabulary for fundraising. I'm still learning. I am still learning. I've been very fortunate along the way to lean on investors who open the door and say, I can help. Sometimes you don't feel like that's what you need to be doing right now, but sometimes that's exactly what you need to be doing. I remember Maria Verasaris. She's the founder of um, Sky Ventures. She's in healthcare, but she's a private investor. And the first time I pitched to her, um, she invested, but she circled back. She said, I'd love to talk to you about how you pitch. Because I don't think you're doing yourself any service. And then so I booked time with her. I took the time and booked time with her. I like to think that I'm a good mentee as well. People like to be mentors. You have to be a good mentee. So I booked time with her and she pitched me. And the first time she pitched me, I said, "Oh my God, I would never talk about myself that way." She said, "Carmel," she's like, "This is what you're selling, especially at this stage. What you have that is more important than anything else is your experience. And you're not leaning on that. You're talking about financial inclusion. You're talking about this. Honestly, investors don't care. That's the truth. Investors care about whether you can deliver whatever the heck you think you're going to do. Can you do it and can they make the money? And that changed my whole pitch as a founder, realizing that, okay, now I can talk about, yes, I managed some of the best software portfolios at IBM. I grew revenue from zero to $100 million ARR in 5 years. I recapitalize, reorganize about $32 billion of assets for IBM. So that language was not part of my pitch at all, right? So finding what you have that is different, what stands out, and what aligns with um, investors, and for them to get that comfort and de-risk the case for them, is what I've had to learn how to do. And then managing people is not always what it seems, and figuring it out depending on the culture, depending on where you're hiring people. I've had great teams. I've had bad teams. I've had to let people go. I've had to hire. But one thing I realized about myself as a solo founder, I'm a no drama CEO. I value smooth transitions. I value good communication. One of our core values as a company is mutual respect, and continuous learning. We're pioneers. We love to innovate in what we're doing. That's who we are. That's who we'll continue to be. And finding people and treating people like this is something that I've learned and developed a skill. And I'm so proud and happy of the team that we have right now. I just came out from a 2-day offsite. We're pumped.
Love that. Awesome. Now, one of the things that we love to do before we wrap up is just wondering whether there's any resources or any individuals that you really looked up to as you've been on this journey, that you could share to our listeners.
Oh man, yes. One of my favorite books that changed my life is The Platform Revolution. Brainwashed me, to be honest, totally brainwashed me. um, I have so many role models. I mean, Sarah Blakely come to mind just because of the sheer you know, grit that it takes sometimes to build a unicorn. I love that woman. I listen. I think I know everything about her story. Uh, I've listened to quite a bit of historical books, believe it or not, that for some reason, okay, so let me share. My mind is wired. I love business. I personally love the idea of figuring out business models. Before I started EmTech, I had about 5 business plans somewhere in my drive that I never, if you talk to anybody in my MBA class, I was always working on some mobile app and some mobile money app and some financial market app. So by the time I graduated, everybody knew that I was going to end up doing something that had to do with financial products. But another book that changed my life and that gave me conviction, was The Tower and the Networks. I'll find the book. It's by Neil Grayson. I'll find the book for you. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out here. But it talks about the cycle of life of today. Any institution always have the rebels that are always want to take down the institution. Everyone always want to take down whatever is working right now. People are always mad about something. But the cycle of life will tell us that the ones who are rebels today, that when they take the tower down, then at some point, if there is no leader that emerges, it's chaos.
Mm.
The ones who were rebels today will become the tower tomorrow, and on we
It's
go.
like the innovator's dilemma. It's like
Yeah.
Correct.
exactly what literally helps you get there. You can't maintain it because now you're there, and then the cycle continues. The
Correct.
disruptors become incumbents, and the incumbents become disruptors, and
That's
it's
right.
just
And if you know that, one, you might be building for the tower today. How
Yeah.
do you build for knowing that the rebels will become the tower tomorrow,
yeah.
and be prepared for that, and being able to put yourself in that cycle and be part of it, because it most likely won't change. We're human beings.
Probably. Yeah, and it's like the cycles is like they say history doesn't happen exactly, but it does have echoes. Like
Yeah.
there's similarities.
Yeah, yeah,
Final
yeah.
quest final question before we wrap up. What's the one thing you would tell yourself just at the point where you were making the leap, that you needed to hear? You just don't know, you didn't know it then, but you know it now, but you know Carmel needed to hear that? What would you say?
I didn't always know what that we were going to do what we're doing today. Um, what would that be? How would I say this? Um, this is more at the time when I was making the leap. I had a conviction that there was something for me waiting on the other side. I just didn't know what it was. I just didn't know how it was going to fall into place. Um, and if I had to go back and tell myself something, or kind of needing to hear something, is that don't get tied up and don't take it personal that your innovation, your first idea, didn't resonate the way you wanted to resonate. It's okay. It is okay that you can't talk about this big thing that you have in your mind and you can't find the right person who understands it exactly the way you do. That there's a lot more you can do on the way there. And
Love that.
getting comfortable with that, getting comfortable with figuring out step one, even though you have step 100 in your mind already, it's okay if it doesn't look the same. And for me, if I had heard that, I think I probably would have been more confident in my fundraising, been able to kind of do what I'm doing today, and being able to paint that roadmap to the big picture instead of selling that big picture and everybody's like,
Eye in the
what is the
sky.
light for
Yeah.
that? Being more practical and the short term is
Love
what I
it.
would have told myself.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to have you. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Great questions. Thank you. I'll do this any day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all of our platforms at The Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guests. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.